So welcome to Practice Best Practices Project Planning for Creatives Workshop. I'm Dan Santoro, the project manager for Practice Best Practice, and among other things, I'll be hosting the workshop tonight. And we want to start off by thanking our principal sponsor, the Fall River Arts and Culture Coalition, FRAC, who's running the whole ignition project of artist grants, which tonight is a part of. Ashley Okino, the director of FRAC, will tell you about that in a minute. We also want to thank our generous funders, Rockland Trust Charitable Foundation, and the Carver, Dartmouth, and New Bedford Local Cultural Councils, which are local agencies which are supported by the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency. We're also supported by generous in-kind support from our partners, the National Park Service, New Bedford Art Museum, Artworks, New Bedford Co-Creative Center, New Bedford Creative, and S&G Project Gallery Art Brokerage. We also want to thank Kat Knutsen, Jim McKeague, and Mark Parsons for taking the time out of their busy lives to create the workshop content tonight, and for being here to present and answer your questions. A few notes before we begin. If you have questions during the workshop, please type them into the chat. Some of our board members will be working with the chat to keep track of things. And when the presentations are done and we select your questions, we'll ask you to unmute so you can ask your question out loud. This will also give you the ability to do follow-up questions. If you prefer for us to read your question, please type that in with the question. Please keep yourself on mute during the presentations because unmuted people can be disruptive in a Zoom. You can unmute when asking questions. We suggest you put your Zoom in speaker mode rather than gallery mode during the presentation. You'll be able to see much more information. You can put it in gallery mode when we get into the Q&A if you prefer. Closed captioning is available. You can turn closed captioning on with the little CC icon at the bottom of your screen should you need or want it. We'll also have a short survey online, which you can take right here in the meeting, which we'll put up near the end of the session. Feedback is really important to us, so please fill it out. Also, you can add comments about the workshop in the chat as we're wrapping up, or you can email them to contact@practicebestpractice. We'll also put the recording of this workshop online at practicebestpractice.com in a few days for those who missed it or wish to review. If you're on our email list or social media, you'll see the notices when that happens. All past workshops are always available on our website for viewing. So we hope you've liked us on Facebook and Instagram and signed up for our email list. Also, although our workshops are always free, they do cost to produce them. And if you would like to make a tax-deductible contribution to Practice Best Practice, you can find the donate button at the top of every page on our website. We get 100% of that money. None of it's taken by PayPal. Now here is Ashley Okino, the director of FRAC, to tell you about the Ignition Project.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. So I'm really absolutely thrilled, and I have to say a big thank you to Mass Development. Through their TDI Creative Catalyst Grant Program, we're able to do this. So the Ignition Fund is a multi-tiered program that has two components to it. One being micro grants of $2,500. We will be handing out 10 awards. There are two parts to the application. The first is eligibility. So if you are a Fall River artist, whether you live or work in the city, if you have a deep connection to the city, we would love to have you apply. Right in the chat, I'm going to drop a link that will take you directly to the page. On here, you can fill out the eligibility form. It's about 8 questions long. Just want to know who you are. And then from there, you'll have the opportunity to fill out the second part of the application. If you have questions along the way, I'm more than happy to answer them. Happy to jump on a Zoom call with people as well. Just a reminder, part 1 of this application is due this Friday, January 20th. The main application is due February 28th. And so part of the Ignition Fund, besides handing out wonderful micro grants to 10 people in Fall River, also involves 4 workshops. And so the first one takes place this evening. Dan and I will be partnering back up along with co-sponsor New Bedford Creative on February 15th for the next. And then we'll have 2 more that we'll announce, one in spring and one in fall. But we're looking forward to it. And again, feel free to check out our website. Please follow us on social media. I'll drop in that link too. We always have good information on there. And as always, FRAC is here to be an advocate, an asset, and a resource for everyone. And so with that, I think we should jump into it.
Okay.
All right.
So Now, without further ado, let me tell you about our presenters tonight and then turn it over the program. We have with us Kat Knutsen, who's a multimedia artist with a focus on community engagement, visual design, production, and education. Jim McKee, who's South Coast Cluster Lead Strategist for Mass Development's Transformative Development Initiative, TDI. And Mark Parsons is an entrepreneur, artist, educator, technologist, and he's the founder and executive director of New Bedford Research and Robotics. We suggest you read their full bios on the website for more information on their panel's background. Now let me turn things over to Mark to begin.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Ashley. I'm going to share my slides with you guys, but I want to say first, Dan and Ashley, it's such a service that you are bringing to creatives from the South Coast. I'm assuming everyone's from the South Coast. And I want to thank you for that. And as an artist who started here in New Bedford and went on and is now back, I wish I had had that kind of support infrastructure, community network here. So I think it's amazing that you guys are doing that. And to everyone who's here, it takes courage to show up to these. It's hard. We put ourselves out there. We feel vulnerable. We fail a lot in pursuing the creative, disciplines. And I just want to acknowledge that. And the way I constructed my talk today, we're doing this for like 15, 20 minutes, right, Dan? Was not to like pick my best projects. It was to pick a few projects that were a range of kind of success and failure in order that, we had some kind of fodder for the conversational canon about what worked, what didn't work, why'd you do that, that stuff. I also want to, I'm sharing my screen now, say that I was unable to figure out how to see my notes at the same time as I was showing you these slides. So I'm doing a little bit of winging it here. So pardon me for, I'll probably skip some things. So the first thing is, who am I? What am I? I'm an artist. I've been an artist. I've been living in New York City for the last 24 years, but I've also been a director of an architecture school. I've also had a design build business. I have, designed international shelters, in Haiti. And, I've done I'm a project person. And I am always doing it wrong. And I want to start with that caveat. I'm always doing it first and figuring out how to pay for it afterwards. I think it's just kind of part of who I am. But it, in the end, has worked for me to do things that way because it feeds my soul to do projects. So I kind of don't care if I don't get the money that I thought I should get in doing a project like that. And, I keep tripping forward. What can I say? And so while we could be talking about lots of projects, lots of different project typologies, I'm sticking strictly to art in this so that it stays in the kind of creative thing, but we could be talking about design, we could be talking about technology, we could be talking about a lot of things. And I hope that as I become a part of this community again, and some of your faces get more familiar to me, we can continue conversations beyond today. So I'm going to talk very briefly about Big Burr, Sundrop, Dissonance Bridge, and Redline, especially briefly about Sundrop as cases in point for creative projects that I've done. And I put Big Burr in the kind of win, Sundrop in the lose, Dissonance Bridge in a kind of lost leader win, and Redline in the win. And I've got a couple slides that actually have some notes on them, so I won't forget everything I'm supposed to be saying as we go. The first project is Big Burr, and I would say this was a marker for me as a modicum of success as a professional artist in that they reached out to me. I don't know how they got a hold of me, but I got to say, in all the projects I've done, and I've done hundreds of projects, very, very small percentage of them are not through somebody I already know. We trust people, we like working with people. That's kind of one of the main points of my conversation with you today. It's all about how you work and how you communicate with others. In this case, they reached out to me and said, do you want to do this? It's an environmental sculpture. We've got this problem with bamboo on the site. And, with the process, like many other processes, I put together, a conceptual statement and a concept of what I could do as a sculptor. Sorry, that's my traditional training is, sculpture from metal and wood and, stone and casting bronze and, traditional materials. And so I did go through that process, and I figured this was a cool prospect. I really liked the material. Conceptually, I was comfortable with it, but the artist stipend was not great. It was like $5,000 or something like that. It was not a lot of money, but to me, it was something that I wanted to, I can't remember, 7, 5, I can't remember what it was. It wasn't in double digits. And I was excited about the process, and I put together, and even though I do well with technology, I think the balance of the kind of communication by hand you see in my drawings is kind of combination of pastiche, amalgam of like digital and drawn. I think that's important. I think even in architectural drawings, we can convey a lot more with the hand than we can with machines. Once I was awarded this, it was like, okay, cool. Oh my God, now I got to actually make the thing that I said I was going to do, right? And so I started doing tests and using light materials and much smaller materials. And at the same time, what I was doing was I was getting on the phone and I was making trips to site, because on the one hand, what I'm doing is testing out my concept. How can I build it? How is it fraught with challenges? How's it going to work the way I expect it to? So I'm doing that under controlled circumstances. And then when I get to site, I'm far more prepared and far more efficient in this case. And I know this is like, not everybody's like building a sculpture on site, but you can kind of project these values into whatever it is that your medium, whatever it is that your medium is. And certainly on site, I confronted issues in this case that I didn't expect. The scale of things, sometimes it rained heavily and the glue that I was using didn't, and I just switched glues and used like expanding, foams and things to hold things together, et cetera. But in the end, it worked out really well. And professional, photos were taken of this. And so like, okay, fine, there's the project. So what does it come down to? Where were the artist's responsibilities? And what was the sponsoring body responsible for it? These are important. Obviously, the idea is mine, and what came out of my stipend was travel and food costs, and of course, I was responsible for the construction. This is important. The sponsor harvested the bamboo for me. If I had to harvest the bamboo for this, there's no way it would have been any return on investment for my time. They gave me housing near the site. That was essential. I needed to be down there. This is down in Maryland. I needed to be down there for a few days at a time for, several trips. And they paid for the equipment that was required, the heavy equipment, and they trusted me. And I think they trusted me because of line number one, because when they got on the phone with me, as a finalist, we established a good working rapport, and I immediately went down for a site visit. You can't get it done on email, and you can't get it down on the phone. You have to be face-to-face. And then once I was awarded this, it was essential to stay in my strengths, and my strengths in New York was that I had a studio and I had facilities. I could do all my testing. I could do all my failure in New York. I could work out all the bugs, and I could make all the intelligent componentry at home for me in New York. And that was the machinery that I needed to, carve the spheres that are at the center of these hubs in the assemblies. And then when I went to site, it was merely kind of putting the parts together. So that was, as being efficient as I could on site. So we won national, landscape architecture award for this. We got professional documentation for this, and it led to the next project. So net, $7,000 in the pocket, big deal. But it is a commission. It's always good to have a commission. And of course, it led to the next, we get the award. And by the way, $7,000 disappears quickly. It's ephemeral. But getting an award is something that stays with you. It stays on your resume. It's meaningful. It's a third-party judgment. It's ostensibly an an objective judgment from a third party in this case. So that's huge. So was it worth it? Yes, I love it. I love doing the project. It feeds my soul. I mean, I love making work. So for every reason, this was a success. Do I wish I could have made, 17,000 instead of 7,000? Sure. But it went so well, and I created such great relationships that it leads to the next one, because I got a call a month later. We're doing a big project. It's a big commission, also in Montgomery County, but it's in the city outside of DC, and we want you to be a part of it. So it paid off. I'm going to be very brief on this one because this was a fail. So what I did was on this one was put together a great proposal. I think I only have 3 slides. It had the community engagement component that I love, going out and working with the community, different groups from the community to do these drawings about how this park could function for them, and then extracting that data from the drawings that the community was doing, and then creating 3-dimensional artifacts from it that would compose this sun drop arch in the park over the raised bed gardens. And it satisfied everything. It was a great, I became a finalist on it. They were like, I was basically told, you got it, this is great. And then what ended up happening was that when I made the walkthrough tour with them, they had told me that the side of this building was available, this senior center was available and could be utilized, but it turns out that 2 of the finalists, myself and 1 other, were utilizing this wall, and it was not available to us. So long story short, they made us repitch. They made the last 3 finalists all repitch with new ideas, and that one didn't work out. But maybe dodged a bullet, right? Because if the project is not managed well enough to know kind of what parts of the site are available and what parts of the site are not available, who knows? All right, Dissonance Bridge, totally different, completely different profile piece. There's a short video. Oh, you know what? I don't know if I shared my sound. Hold on 1 second. Okay, this is a 1-minute video. Can you hear? Can you hear?
When they arrived, guests first submitted images emblematic of dissonance in their lives today. Those images were automatically abstracted and turned into line drawings and then layered onto a canvas 16 feet wide and 8 feet high. And the bridge was created through the act of engaging with that canvas, tracing in blue and black and orange, until after 3 hours the music faded and the lights went on and we saw Dissonance Bridge for the first time. Mark Parsons.
Okay. So nobody paid me. There was no sponsor. It was a total kind of just investment of my time in a speculative way, right? So what was I responsible for? A lot of things. Concept development, the materials that went into it. I paid the musicians. There was live improvisational sound. There we had, beer and wine. It was an event. This was an event, right? I had an assistant that I needed to compensate. I think the main driver in being able to do this was that I had a room available in New York in the Brooklyn Navy Yard to do this. I had to find the participants, and of course I had to document, and then I had to put together the video afterwards, right? So that's a lot of time in, and maybe $1,000 worth of cost or something like that. I don't know. I don't remember. But what's the value? yeah, the main thing is the real value is that I have a 1-minute piece that 54, if you include the musicians, were participating in. Everybody had a fantastic time. There was an aha moment to like doing this work in the dark with each other with the projection behind us and then the reveal at the end. And it's networking. And as a morsel of community engagement, kind of a happening. Sometimes I'm curious about whether the artwork is in the happening or in the artifact after the fact. There's something which is emblematic of the way I like to work, the way I like to engage people, and that's going to help me get the next thing. And that's what you're always thinking about. You're always thinking about what's the next thing. So was it worth it? Yes. I guess what could I have done better? Storing an artwork of that size and moving an artwork of that size in New York is a bitch. There's no other way to say it. So 8 feet by 16 feet. It was a lot to do with afterwards, and I didn't have a plan for that. And if I had had a plan for that, it would be 100% win. Okay, and then Red Line. So this is Red Line. It's 2012 commission at Grounds for Sculpture. Again, starting with workshops where we're bringing in community members and they're doing drawings. We're exporting those drawings onto 3-dimensional surfaces and then building up a kind of framework out of 1 ton of recycled paper pulp. Again, it's another kind of environmental piece. Then it's, kind of moved to site. There's a solo exhibition that goes with it while it's moved to site, and they come and move all my stuff to in this case, Grounds for Sculpture in Princeton, New Jersey. And 2 years later, it is evolving the way it's there's entropic forces on the way it falls away, and a kind of drawing becomes a sculpture, becomes a drawing in space again. And I'm very, very proud of this work, but this talk is not about the work and the concept, it's about the process. And I consider this one of my really good projects, not just because qualitatively I'm proud of the work and the way it's come through, but because of the way the whole thing was managed, right? So there were things like liability insurance that I was responsible for, any specialized tools, transportation, and running several workshops, which included the drawing workshops and then the assembly workshops on site. Right. So those responsibilities were part of my proposal, but also, kind of part of what made this valuable to Grounds for Sculpture. And what they did, what you'll see, I can read this list, but what you're seeing that Grounds for Sculpture did was what was easy for them. Studio space, they managed the workshop participants, they provided housing on sites. They moved the sculpture. I mean, that's a huge fee, art moving, especially big stuff. And that, the sculpture went to a collector upstate afterwards. So it lived on site for 3 years and then it went upstate. They moved everything from New York. They did the packing. Art packing is another super expensive thing. They produced a 9-minute video and they reimbursed me for costs, essentially, right? So this was a huge, the paycheck, I can't remember what the paycheck was, 22, something like that, 25. It was in the low to mid 20s, but all the costs were taken care of, right? So I think that is crucial. You want to rely on your partner and your sponsor to do the things that they do well so that you can do the things that you do well. And that's all about communication. So I mean, what's the what's the takeaway? The client was happy. They got a ton out of it. And so did I. They got more engagement from their community who participated and learned in the creation of an artwork. And we had lots of conversations and presentations throughout. So that's a win for them. And it's a win for me, right? So it's good and it helps get the next one. So my final slide, sorry for doing this without my notes in front of me, but you're getting most of it. I can't say this enough. Your ideas as an artist or a creative are maybe fabulous, but they're only as good as they are in service to your sponsor or your grantor's needs, right? Everyone has an agenda. You have a conceptual agenda as an artist. Whoever you're working with has an agenda, right? So if you look at what Ashley is doing right now, Ashley has an agenda, and it's to get artists involved and get artists moving. And Den has an agenda, and that's, you know, something similar, and they can talk about their mission. But whatever we are doing as artists, we're either doing it alone at home in the studio, or we're doing it out in the world. And if we're doing it out in the world, we are serving others. And, you know, it took me a long time to figure that out, And as soon as you get clarity on that, you're going to have much better success in getting grants and working with partners. The other thing, and you heard me say this a couple times, you have to ask, you have to socialize around with your partners. Like Big Burr, they're like, okay, great, you make $7,000. I'm like, okay, I'm going to end up spending a lot of that $7,000. How can you? It's going to take me time to get down there. What can I do? How can you help me? And you got to pick and choose your times to have that conversation, so they're delicate and not cumbersome or rude. But inevitably, your partner has resources, and those resources, you know, when we are steeped in resources, we can share them easily. You need to find out what your sponsor can share with you to ease the cost or burden on yourself in order to deliver the best product possible. And when I say $10 equals $1, $10 equals $100, what I mean is the way organizations manage budgets means that if you ask for something that is within a budget that they have access to or doesn't cost them anything, that $10 can go a long way, meaning you can get a lot, and it's not a big ask. But if you ask the wrong question, like, can't you just pay can't you give me a per diem so I can have lunch every day while I'm doing that? That might be way out of left field. And even though it's only, you know, $35 a day, that's completely inappropriate, depending on who your sponsor is. So you just need to get clear on what that is and go to what is comfortable for them. Please, please, please document your work very well. I think that's a lot easier today than it used to be. And building trust, I think, is super important. The last thing I want to say is that it's a game of attrition. You know, I saw so many people come out of graduate school, they were hot shit, and, you know, at the big gallery, and 3 years later, they're all burned out. They're not making art anymore, or whatever. 3 years, whatever, 13 years later. If you if you have integrity in the work that you do, and you have professional communication and respect, and you treat it like you're working with human beings and you want to serve them, and I really mean that, we are in service to others as artists and creatives, then number one, you can sustain the effort much longer because it's feeding your soul. Number two, people want to work with you longer. So, and it'll get you the next thing. So, you know, there you go. There's my 20 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was great. We're going to be having Kat present next. Kat Knutsen, who's an artist who's worked on many projects. Some of you may know some of her work from around the city, but she's not confined to around the city. So Kat, on you go.
All right. Thank you, Den. Mark, I think that was a really great presentation. Some of the takeaways that I kind of want to jump on are material problem solving, figuring out what materials are right for each project, marketing properly, and then being mindful of the third party and what they need. That is absolutely on point. It's important as artists to be mindful of what you want to do with your resources and time, but even I think sometimes more important to figure out who you're going to be working with and how you can find a way to make their vision come to life. And I ended up starting a company. It's Kat Knutsen Studios, and the tagline for that is basically trying to make others' visions come to life, because as artists, as creatives, whether you're working on left or right side of the brain, you're basically helping others' ideas come to fruition with your skill set. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start screen share. But thank you, Mark. That was a lot of information. Thank you. Y'all can see the screen. Okay, so my background, these are two images. I think they're the two biggest projects I'm known for. The one on the top is the jazz mural downtown New Bedford. I'll go into some details about that shortly. And then the bottom one is a full film, Loving Vincent. Oops, I think there's like a timer going on there. Loving Vincent, which is a film I was a part of back in between 2016 and 2017. So I wanted to say, I started off my experience as an artist at the community college setting. I was in nursing first. I had a really quick pivotal experience that led me to taking a few art classes at this community college in North Carolina. I had an amazing set of professors who were very inspiring. They didn't necessarily teach us how to draw or teach us business, but they told us that if you put your mind to something, you could learn a new thing, but it's up to you if you want to learn it, but you got to put the time in. And I thought that that was absolutely fantastic. So I decided to give the art world a whirl, and I just fell in love with it. So I studied at a community college, collected the credits that I had from nursing, took a couple of studio classes, and transferred to a university in Asheville, North Carolina. This school was a really great school. It really helped my experience as a project developer because they pushed interdisciplinary research where you had to cross-pollinate ideas between different subjects. I was in the fine arts, and so I decided to mix that with social psychology. So I ended up making a series of paintings that were about how the first smartphone was coming out. This was in 2011, 2010. So the first smartphones were really starting to become a thing. And I was witnessing how that was changing the dynamics of communication, you know, the candid conversation dynamics. I then went to UMass Dartmouth. I finished my master's degree there, and I helped to develop the multimedia curriculum at that school. I think they're now teaching courses with this material. So it was basically a time when I was starting to combine painting and animation together. I thought it was fantastic to create a product where you kind of got a chance to have like an ephemeral, like hands-on feel for the brush mark and also the time-based media. There's no sound in this video, by the way, no sound. So I had a whirl of a time studying this, and I knew that at this point I wanted to combine both video and sound in my work. And I went to school to become a professor, and I teach now at Bristol Community College. I teach in the traditional media and digital media departments. But what's really important to me as a teacher is I didn't want to show students just how to do things like drawing or design. I felt like students need to understand how to go out into the world, whether they have a degree or not, understand how to take their creative skills and learn how to make revenue with them. And so I didn't have that experience exactly as a student learning the business, you know, practice. So I made it a point after graduating to jump into a lot of projects. And that's probably one of the first bits of advice I would give young artists or new artists or continuing artists, no matter what level. Projects are the best way to learn. Have an idea of what you want to either take away from the project, what you want to learn or gain from the project. If it's about revenue, what can you contribute to a party to make their life easier in some way, shape, or form? And so I started doing a lot of these different projects. I spent a couple of years running through the fashion world, sculpture, mixing them together with illustration to create animation projects. I started a publication from scratch called The Siren, where I was trying to take a wide sample of what was going on in the art community visually, music scene, and literary scene, and kind of create a constant sample, like wider snapshot of what was going on. That was at the same time that the residency was happening. And then I was requested, well, there was a commercial that I saw for this project that was happening. This was the film Loving Vincent was in the process of being completed. And I sent in basically the equivalent of bang on the door application by going to the website, clicking on that section where it says contact us, sending an email plus content from like my portfolio saying, I'd really like to be a part of this project. Is there any more information? They didn't necessarily have an apply here button. I went straight to the source and was like, I'd love to be a part of this project. Some time went by. I was teaching at the time. The semester was getting ready to come to a closure. And then serendipitously, as the semester was finishing, I got an email back saying they did want me to be a part of the team. And let's talk about what went into this project a little bit. So this project, I was kind of like a boots on the ground animator. I did not have any responsibilities outside of like making work that was right in front of me. I had to paint each scene or each cell frame for my scene of the video. Each frame was 20 inches by 30 inches. It was done with oil painting. It was done via a projection. You know, they had all of the cells spliced out. We were animating on what are called twos, where it's 12 frames times 2, unless we had a very fast scene, which then we were animating on ones. And you had to make sure that your frame that you were painting was approved of by the art director. And then once it was approved, you took a photo of that frame and then went on to the next frame by scraping away your panel. The mistake you did not want to make was forgetting to take a photo and then scraping your panel and then realizing you have to paint that frame again. It took on average between 2.5 hours at least to paint each frame. So if you scrape through a frame, you've got a lot of makeup work that you have to do. So what I learned about this was, you know, as an animator, I wasn't in charge of the directing, the script writing, the fundraising. I was just a part of a team that had to assimilate to what was going on. And so there were a lot of artists from all over the world who had different styles, and they put us through a very basic training program where they taught us how to animate in the style that they wanted. And the ones that couldn't do that, they were sent home. And there was one person on our team who was sent home because she could not make the right paint marks, brush marks, and she had to fly all the way back. I want to say it was like Argentina she came from. So she flew there, flew back, and she didn't have anything to show for the time and money she had spent going to and from the studio. So as an artist, I would say if you're wanting to be a part of projects and you're coming in as like a studio assistant, if you're coming in as you're wanting like a mural painter, look at what style is being used, or if it's sculpture, look at what materials are being used and what's the end goal, and then try to see if you can use your skills to assimilate to what's needed to get that project done as efficiently as possible. And then of course, communicating regularly with either your director or team leader to figure out what needs to be done, asking questions of how you can make the project move along more efficiently. You're going to be remembered for doing that because they're going to be like, oh my gosh, this person not only fulfilled that role, they looked outside of what their role required and then asked questions about that and then extended their skill set to that, which then, depending on which project you're working on, going back to what Mark was talking about, you want to make the client's vision come to life. So if this client sees that you're reaching beyond what was requested, you might want to communicate with them and say, I can add additional value to the project. Is there a way to either extend bits of the budget if necessary or take on extra roles? But that's going to be a conversation to have over contracts. This is a part of the scene that I animated for the film. This is the actual frames that we used. While this project was happening, I was still continuing my painting practice. This was a time when I was starting to paint portraits of friends that I had in the community that I was seeing regularly here and there, and they were becoming models for me for different ideas in a painting series. A couple of years later, so we're now, the pandemic hits, the COVID hits, it's 2020. I got an email from the Superflat, Jeremiah, saying that there was a mural that was going to be coming up where they needed portrait artists. I immediately jumped at the opportunity to do that. I had never painted a mural before. I was used to working on an 18 by 24 to 20 by 30. I'd painted like a 5 foot by 7 foot painting before, but I'd never painted a large mural before. So I was going to have to do a lot of research and learning about materials. And what I learned was, you know, there's paints that work for interior, exterior, there's different types of surface paints. And then there's different methods to scale up an image. There's grid methods, there's projected methods, there's organic grid methods like squiggly grid methods. So I had to learn a lot of these different processes to figure out how to get the job done efficiently. And I wasn't paid to learn those things. I either got the job or I didn't get it. I either like was able to execute the job on budget, in time, good quality or not. And it reminds me, like every time you engage with either a potential client or an organization, you're both spending time that's extremely precious, and opportunity cost is going out the window while your time is being spent engaging with one another. So it's always important to try your best to deliver quality in every way that you possibly can. So figure out what they're looking for, figure out what's the point of the project's existence to begin with, what's the final outcome of the experience they're seeking to provide for others or for themselves, and then figure out if it's within either your immediate skill set or if it's something you could learn fast enough at a good quality industry level to be able to execute on time, in budget, and without getting on people's nerves in a way. Stuff happens sometimes within projects, like if an email wasn't read, but you want to try your best to like get those things done as efficiently as you can. I was the role of the designer for the project. This project was about highlighting and celebrating a lot of the musical talent in the history of the jazz scene in New Bedford. This building owner also owns a production company, and he's worked with all these musicians. The initial project, they wanted to have a grid of portraits laid out, and I was like, guys, people are going to see the portraits, but they're not going to really understand the context of who they are. So the design was created to kind of emphasize that aspect of who these gentlemen are and what role they played in the history of the music community in New Bedford. Again, I have on here the template boss client. So the client in this case was I was working with Superflat, the New Bedford Historic Society, Whaling City Sound, and the fiber optics. I can't remember the name of that company, but I had to keep in mind all these different parties, and then also the parties of people who helped install this. And actually there's two people here who were absolutely fantastic artists. I want to give a shout out to them, Mandy Frazier and Autumn, I don't know if you're still here, but y'all, Autumn Sear, they were absolutely fantastic artists that helped install this. So that actually brings up another point. Find your friends who are also really amazing at doing stuff and bring them on board your projects, and then make projects happen together, because every colleague, as Mark was saying, has different strengths, and you want to kind of work in a very symbiotic fashion to help make bigger ideas come to life. And this is a really great example of that. The dance mural that happened almost simultaneously shortly thereafter, this was a mural where it was going to be installed along, I forget the name of the theater, I think it was the Capitol Theater in the north end of New Bedford. This was a smaller scale theater. I had to buy basically pieces of plywood, prime them, and make a design that was going to fit in that setting. I came up with the concept of dance because I think dancing is something that's extremely celebratory. I don't know who does not have fun dancing and celebrating anything about history, anything that's popular, is something that brings a lot of like good feelings, good vibes to a setting. This was a much smaller budget that I was working with, and this became about quickly putting some design ideas together and executing them. But the deadline was extended because the budget was smaller. So different projects are going to have different variables that are more flexible than others. Sometimes the variable is a deadline situation, sometimes it's a budget situation. Like Mark was talking about, you want to figure out how far you can get your dollar to stretch, and also how far you can get your hour to stretch. And when I say hour, I mean, like, if you're working with hiring an assistant, if you're going to subcontract out, make sure that you pay them well. Make sure that, like, I could go on forever on the whole minimum wage bullcrap stuff, like at least 20, 25 hours to an hour, start there. Like if you're bringing on people to help, make sure you take care of them, right? But the hour can be stretched if you have others helping you get the project done. Other things like access to technology, things like the Adobe, I would heavily recommend learning the Adobe software programs like Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign. If you're doing animation media or new media, After Effects, Premiere, there's also other animation softwares that are out there. But in this case, for this project, it was plywood, it was 3 panels, and I had to get them installed before the end of, I think it was between like December and January 2020, 2021. The Hatch Street mural that happened this past summer. This was the first mural where my company was able to get the sale, and then also hired on students that I had recently had the privilege to work with at Bristol Community College, who graduated and did an extremely amazing job in class. So I started treating my teaching practice in a way as, okay, I'd like to present these ideas to the class of who is interested in drawing, who is interested in working with murals, who's interested in animation. And then I deliver the concepts in my assignments in a way that teaches them directly what it would be like to bring some of these different projects to life. And then the ones that do extremely well and show a lot of interest in this, I consider actually hiring them for a project, because one of the things that I feel like when I was a student, there wasn't a proper integration system between academic setting and professional setting. So this project was the first time I was able to take students outside of a classroom and then hire them directly onto a project. The Hatch Street mural was designed as basically a billboard to help bring more attention and basic information to where the Hatch Street studios are located in the north end of New Bedford. I had to manage of course, the materials, the design, looking at the surface that the paint was going to be going on, making sure that it had a decent longevity. So I coat it with a decent coating that helps fight the UV lights and everything. And then managing the team, making sure they're safe, making sure like everything around that area was safe. I know that there was a lot of broken glass we had to deal with. There were some windows above the scene that had broken glass in them. And I was like, that doesn't look very safe. And so I contacted the building owner and they said, we'll take care of that. That was dealt with. But I had to make sure that everyone part of the project was in a safe setting, that nothing was going to happen to them. I had to make sure I had like liability insurance. I also had workman's comp in this case. And then I had to deal with taxes as far as sending out 1099s for this project as well. So what I love about this practice is, like, if you, as an artist, if you're wanting to go business owner, there's a lot of left brain things that you're going to have to start doing more of: accounting, contracts, talk with a lawyer, like help, like they're worth their time, like that you spend asking them, hey, this kind of transaction is getting ready to happen, does this make sense? And then there's that, I remember someone once told me, like, Babe Ruth's contract was written down on a napkin and he was asked to play a certain number of games. And so like a contract can be like whatever is clearly articulated of what one party expects from the other party. It can be small, it could be at length. There could be all sorts of details involved, but it's very important that both parties understand what's expected from each other in that process. How am I doing on time? Am I running out? Am I going over? Do I still have some time?
Yeah, you still have a little time.
Okay, good. All right. So that's going to be a bit of closure for the mural part. I'll show this really quickly. This is an animation example of the animation pipeline development that I'm working on with another group of recently graduated students. So this is one of the directions my studio is going in, where I'm going to be working This was a really quick sample piece that was designed and developed. I worked with a couple of folks at Christie, a couple of
Kat, the music on that is drowning out your voice.
Okay. All right. So let me mute this. Okay. So this was a project I built with a couple of folks at RISD a couple of years ago. And what I was doing was kind of creating a pipeline for animation and figuring out all the different roles that would go into that. And what I'm excited about doing moving forward in this aspect of the company is actually designing animations for different either musicians, organizations, and whoever is interested in that. But what I love is the process of building a pipeline to help provide that service, and also bringing on artists, for that. This was a festival that I did an animation for last year, Nocturne Function. It's an EDM music festival that's based out in Western Mass. The main roles that had to be filled were concept artist, illustrator, and animator. I had to, the budget for this one wasn't the best. It was like $1,000 budget, and I had to create like a 20-second long video for it. But what I really gained from that was learning about what's going to make the pipeline a lot more efficient. And so as you're starting off, either as an independent contractor, if you're starting off, if you're wanting to work with another organization, if you have a lot of things to learn, that could be an exchange for what the budget is if it's lower. So rather than thinking of it as I'm not getting paid enough, you can think about it as I'm going to get paid to learn this thing. So I had a chance in this transaction, you can say, to learn, okay, in order to make this product execute on time, in budget, into the quality that they want, what are the exact steps that are going to have to go into making that happen? So this one was a big research project as far as that goes. And then there's projects that go into community engagement. I love community engagement. I cannot go on enough about how much I love it. I think it's amazing because whenever artists creatives are engaging with the business owners, municipalities, nonprofits, schools, churches, all of it. There's a sense of, I just feel like if it just helps. It makes things better. It kind of not to a weird cultish degree, not like to an obsessive degree, but just like it helps greatly. Like I went to D Soups today, got this delicious like meal, and then I had a chance to run into two musicians. One of them, Darrell, I can't think of his last name, but he's an amazing musician. He just released an EP. I got a chance to talk with another community engager, of course, and then another musician. I went over to Green Bean and saw like a friend who's doing some really cool stuff. So I feel like there's a type of like support and networking and it's something magical that happens when community stuff occurs. Now, I think it's a good idea to work with what you're familiar with. So if you're passionate about photography, look at what kind of events you could put together that brings more conversation out around photography. If you're excited about building projects, make events like this, like Dense and Turner, like these types of events, like the Fall River Arts Council, like Coalition, make these types of events come to life. But I love community because it's one of those like high tide raises all ships type thing. So this is an example of an event that I ran at the Co-Creative Center last year, I believe, no, 2 years ago. And it was just like taking two artists who were going to do a one-day workshop. And I was talking about drawing, and then Melanie, she was talking about, she was doing a collage workshop and it was talking about healing and everything. So this was an event designed, and the boss was the community center. I had to figure out what would the client need to execute this type of community engagement event that they were looking to sponsor. And then I think this is the last one. This is an event series that I run. It's figure drawing. I'm the independent contractor who's actually promoting the event independently. I work with another organization, the Co-Creative Center, and I take a plan, which is to, give the community access to the opportunity to practice drawing from the live figure. And then I set up a schedule and make sure there's a budget in place to pay the model. And then I make sure that there's plenty of marketing that goes out to reach anyone who's interested in this particular type of activity. And so the role that I have in this is a little bit different, because it's rather than being the artist, I kind of have to step away from the studio and I step more in front of the computers. Like I was talking with Ashley earlier at the beginning of the meeting, like how much time is spent in front of the computer. So there's like the event planning, the emailing, marketing, looking at releasing content on the social media channels, and then also managing the event itself. And so, yeah, and I think that that's it. So like, for me, like it's, like figure out who the client is, what the goal is, why you're doing what you're doing, if you love doing it, and then what does it take to make it viable? And to me, viable is it can continue to happen, it can continue to occur, because like inspiration is great, but you can't pay bills, you can't pay overhead with that. And I know this isn't a workshop specifically on cost, but a really big thing that I take into consideration is what I would call #true cost. Like, what would it cost to make an event come to life? Who's giving what time, what skills, and how can that be compensated, either in an exchange of some sort, if it's direct money, if it's time or whatever, so that all parties are able to continue operating viably. And that's my little obsession of center that I kind of constantly try to focus on every time I try to bring a project to life. So thank you so much for letting me share that experience with everyone. I'll go ahead and pass it off to Jim.
Thank you, Kat. Unshare your screen. Great. And next up, as Kat just mentioned, is Jim McKeague, who many of you may know from around the area. And Jim is going to launch into his work. Jim, unmute.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Those were amazing presentations. I am absolutely just astounded with the art and the talent that I just saw there. I'm going to see, get this into presentation mode. Can everybody see that?
Yep, sound good.
So I am the boring one here. I am going to be talking more about projects that are bigger than oneself in a way. And kind of, I'll start by talking a little bit about how I sort of fell into this work. I am a wayward creative. I did do a lot of art in my youth, and in college spent a lot more time in the sculpture studio than the laboratory. But what I do professionally is when I returned back to my hometown of Worcester, I started really trying to figure out sort of my place in the community. I felt like I didn't really have a strong footing. My parents were not from the community I grew up in, and so so I started working with folks in Worcester to do a lot of what would be probably termed placemaking projects today. And then I've always been in the trade. So we started rehabbing apartments, and I started a company of my own eventually doing historic rehabs of homes across New England, and doing some woodworking, architectural reproductions, that kind of thing. But what I really enjoyed doing was the community work, was the building community gardens, or other projects that involved a lot of different folks that were saying they wanted to see something that wasn't there, and how do you make that thing happen. So these ideas were not necessarily my own. They were working with the community to say, okay, well, what are your needs, what are your wants, and how do you make them happen. Eventually I went back to school to get a planning degree after doing a lot of work in coalition building in Worcester as a property manager downtown. And really found that I enjoyed that work, and that has led to my present job, where I work almost exclusively in the world of partnerships on how do you bring a diverse group of people together to drive the revitalization or of commercial districts primarily, but places that have seen significant disinvestment, and how do you get people coalesced around things they want to see happen. So so I'm going to go through and well, one of the things I should mention is that these are it's listening. So my job has in my experience here has been less of the creative folks that we just heard from. So I haven't approached it so much as an artist or a creative, but how do you creatively look to solutions and collaborate and bring people together effectively in projects that are bigger than you. And some people have called me a professional instigator. I don't know if that's good or bad, but the one of the things I've been really just honored is to work with the people who actually make this stuff happen, the real people who have the collaborative bones in their body and the creative force to come together and to make this stuff a reality. And I'm always astounded and amazed. And I just have to say that we live in a community where we have a number of just remarkable people, and Ashley, who has helped put this event together, I consider one of them, but others like Beatrice Oliveira and Dina Hayden and Patty Rigo, and so many more in the community. And I'm just enormously grateful that I've had an opportunity to work with them and continue to work with them. So I'm going to go through some examples really quickly of some of these kinds of events that that I'm talking about here. These are some that I've been involved with, or some I haven't, but they're all collaborative events in some way that we're creating a making a vision for these massive collaborative projects a reality. So they brought many, many different, people together, different organizations together, and they could be these kind of events, or they could also be public art in murals that we've heard so much about as well. And here's some examples of that locally, and some organizations who do it extremely well. So I'm going to kind of move through this fairly quickly. I'm, as I said, more on the analytical side here, and I just wanted to talk about three main takeaways from this conversation. Is, collaboration doesn't always make sense, and I think you want to collaborate when it does, right? And when you are, trying to figure that out, I think we've heard a lot from the, Mark and Kat already about, what motivates you to do the work. And, in these big, multi-party projects, give yourself some lead time and a little bit of slack, and think through the details thoroughly. And as much as we plan, nothing happens as planned. So, to Mark's point, the sort of jumping into projects and getting stuff done is a great way to learn. But I think you have to be realistic about, when you get into it, and when you start thinking through some of these details, how much time is it going to take, and what is it really going to cost, and how complex, are these projects? So, when you think through some of these, I just want to go through, some of the W's and the H's. And general considerations, and partnerships and participants, the project details, where are they happening, the timelines. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all of them, but I just wanted to kind of talk through some of the moving pieces with thinking through these multi-party projects. The first is, why are you doing it? For fame, and fortune? Are you doing it for the good of the community? Are you doing it for economic development? And is there a financial motivation and community motivation there? Are you doing it just for the love of it, just because of joy? I think all of those things are really important, and they open up sort of the world of possibilities in terms of which direction you want to take as you're planning it. If it's your idea, I think you're going to approach it a lot different than if it's somebody else's idea, or if you're trying to bring a number of people together around something that came out of a bigger planning process, or that the community for a long time has been saying, boy, we want to see this happen. We want to see a mural organization, or we want to see the transformation of this space, or the transformation of this building or this street. So this opens up a lot of different possibilities in terms of the kinds of events and projects you're going to be doing. Are you going to be doing it for free? And participants will be able to take part in it for no charge, or is it more like a business, right? Are you going to be charging a fee, and all of the things that could entail? One of the things that I think is really important is to think about who has already done projects like it, or who has tried to do it in your own community and either did it successful or successfully or not. And one of the big things that I've learned is just to ask people a lot of questions. When I was involved with doing the outdoor film festival in Worcester, which I was on one of the previous slides, there was a film festival that preceded it that was done with a healthcare company of all folks, and we approached them early on, and they were incredibly supportive about giving us tons and tons of information about what they did, what didn't work, what they would have changed. But it also opened up another conversation in terms of potential funding. So they gave us money to do it better, and they were at the table to kind of guide us along the way and tell us, hey, you might not want to do it that way. So ask about people's experiences, and talk to a lot of people to find out what didn't work. Ask yourself if you're the right person to do a particular job or a particular task. I think, one of the things that's been very clear to me as someone who's probably leans to more of the analytic side and the planning side is that there's a lot of things that I'm not good at. In fact, most things I'm probably not good at. So I need to, if I'm involved in a project, I'm curious to find out, well, who is good at these things, who can do them better than I can, and oftentimes, you'll find that those are the basis of some good win-win situations. I think it also might uncover, some folks that you might not want to work with, and you have to go with your gut about, maybe this isn't the best, collaboration, and I want to scale things back. But another thing that can lead to is, if there's another organization who's, specializes in something or has a lot of experience, doing a particular event or, planning certain types of projects, is that you can collaboratively seek funding or collaboratively seek support. And you might very well be more successful if you go into them collaboratively than if not. A lot of grant making, agencies and funders really like to see collaborative proposals. They like to build capacity. They like to rely on existing capacity in order to build more. So when you are going into these relationships and they feel right and they feel good, and they're clearly going to make the project better and maybe more efficient, then I highly recommend exploring some of those opportunities together. And then think about the ease of execution versus that building capacity, right? The more complex a project, the more folks that you'll probably have to bring into the fray, the more professionals you might have to hire from the outside, the more logistics that are going to be involved. So if you thinking about these big complex projects, again, like we've heard some from Mark and Kat, is maybe it's best to start small and think about making it more complex in the next project and building the capacity incrementally. The other thing too is hiring locally can be a really important piece of your projects. I think it's extraordinarily important to pay the artists and the creatives that are part of your projects and pay them a fair wage too. I think it's safe to say that a lot of people and certainly Mark is a good example of this with some of his projects, engage with work that feeds them, that is joyful, that creates value perhaps in other ways, but don't expect that if you're planning these big complex projects. I think you want to treat your artists and your performers and the people that are involved in your projects fairly. And if you don't have the funding to do that, then I would look at scaling back and finding out other ways to kind of fill that gap. And then I just wanted to mention too that public goods can allow for public concession. So if you are doing a project for the good of the community, if you are doing a project to generate economic development, to get people into a particular region and visiting local businesses, that opens up the door for in-kind help. That opens up the door for a lot of other kinds of support and sponsorships. There's a lot of fees that are involved in permitting these big complex things. A lot of permits that take some time to work through. And when you're doing something for the good of the community or the good of the city, and it's in line with what the city administration wants to see and others want to see, it's a lot easier to get help from those groups and to get into situations where some of those fees get waived and other departments step up to do some of that work. So what are you doing? I think it's really important. This is something I do, even though it, again, nothing ever happens according to plan. But I write everything out. I write every little detail. Who do you who do you need to pay, and who needs to manage the project with you? Are you including vendors? Are there people going to be selling stuff? Are artists and performers going to be hired? What are the materials and equipment you need? Where is it going to happen? The scheduling, the approvals and permitting is a big one. Fees and licenses. One of the things that we ran into, for instance, with the film festival, is that even though we were offering it for free, for some of these big name movies, we had to pay a lot of money to license those, right? So there's a lot of costs involved when you start involving, a lot of different pieces. So do your research, figure out, where all these hidden costs are, and inevitably you'll find new ones as you kind of go, into it. Security and safety, just making sure participants are safe and making provisions for that, managing waste and getting porta potties to events, and making sure that all that stuff happens. And parking and transportation can be big, as well, especially if you're closing down streets, or you need to get people around a bigger area. So all of these things cost money and are logistical challenges as well. Where are you doing it? Locations and venues matter a lot. Private venues, obviously, they have certain requirements in terms of getting permission from the owners of the spaces, or specific rental agreements, or use of these spaces. They might just be venues for lease. But a lot of times these projects require some significant negotiation and time, especially mural projects, where you have to talk about the creative content oftentimes, and come up with pretty complex contracts in order to in agreements that protects you, protects the artist, but also protects the owner of the property. If you're doing events outside in parks, they usually require specific approval from some kind of governing body, parks and recreation commissions. Alcohol is usually not allowed. Again, in that movie situation, alcohol was strictly prohibited out in that main park, but it turned out that City Hall had a big plaza, and we had live music and all kinds of vendors before the movie, but it turns out City Hall didn't have the same provision. So the city manager simply said, well, why don't you set up your alcohol on the your beer and wine on the plaza, and we were able to have our own little kind of beer garden up there. But streets and sidewalks are another one. Businesses, these are important considerations in terms of the businesses that that depend on people being able to get there and to buy stuff. So a lot of businesses typically don't like street closures unless they are invited to participate, or is directly for their benefit, and they are part of the the planning, and their businesses are specifically highlighted. Sometimes parades, for instance, can be really hard on businesses because you're shutting down a street and people are facing the street, and they don't really pay much attention to the businesses are there. So be aware of who's being impacted by some of these events or some of these big projects. And then of course street closures also require special permits and police details. It can get expensive and complicated. Again, give yourself lead time. Approvals and permits take time. Permits happen according to set schedules. Commissions have submission deadlines. You have to get materials to them before the next scheduled meeting, which might be a month, sometimes 2 months away, for some boards and commissions. So just be really aware of that. Go on to city websites, look at all of the everything that you can in order to get a sense of how much time some of these things are going to take. Seasonality and weather obviously plays a big part in planning and thinking about participant comfort, and all the other provisions that sometimes need to be provided in order to keep the people who are participating comfortable and safe. And then calendars, check the calendar, make sure that there's not, potential conflicts with other organizations. That's oftentimes a big beef in some communities when, a lot of people plan events on the same days. Sometimes it can work wonderfully. Sometimes, people resent it, and it can build up, conflict between different, different organizations. So, making sure that you're checking the calendar, that you're coordinating with folks that, you may want to collaborate with in the future, or keep in their good graces, and then get your event on the calendar soon, as soon as you can as well. Logistics, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but again, each one of these requires some thinking. I was going to spend most of the time just sort of talking about approvals and permitting. These things exist for a reason. They're to protect the health and safety of the participants. They allow for the efficient coordination of resources from the city side. Many, if not most, require some kind of fee. Again, cities and administrations are oftentimes willing to waive fees if it's in the benefit of the city. Every municipality does things a little differently. I wish we could say that, this is the way it's always done. If you're here and you're here and you're there, it turns out that's not the case. Every city has a different, way of doing things. Their boards and commissions are set up slightly differently. And, oftentimes finding that one point person who kind of knows how all the machinery works can save just a lot of time and aggravation. The licensing office, if the municipality has one, is typically a great place to start. Licensing committees typically are involved in alcohol permitting, one-day permits, things of that nature, but they usually know who to contact in terms of all the different kinds of approvals you'll need. Checking ordinances, municipal websites, asking questions. Again, different regulatory bodies are in charge of different things. So, use of parks and public land is usually Parks Commission. Food vendors and waste management, health department, street closures and special events can be the Department of Public Works, could be the mayor's office, could be the police department. As I said, licensing board usually takes care of the temporary sale, one-day permits of alcohol. Temporary structures, if you're doing a big stage, if you're building something over in a particular public space, you usually need to contact the building department or inspectional services. City councils oftentimes have to approve structures over a right of way. When we build parklets, for instance, we need specific approval, typically from city councils, unless it's by right. Projects in historic districts. So, Kat's project there in the historic district, the jazz mural required special permission from the Historic Commission. So, projects that are in historic districts are going to require the permission of those bodies. Noise nuisance ordinance, if you're going to have live music, if there's other types of activities happening. Some municipalities require you to get a permit for sound and music. If parking, if you're going to be using parking spaces, loading, unloading, meter bagging, you oftentimes need someone to come ahead of time and bag those meters so no one's going to park there, especially if you have people loading, unloading for vendors in particular events. And then things like tents and heaters and those things that might pose a particular threat usually require the sign off from the fire department. So I just wanted to give you a sense of all the different things that can go into permitting some of these events. So how much when you're going for funding and you're starting to create a budget and thinking through it, I find it's usually a pretty iterative process. And sometimes, when you're looking at a particular grant, they might have a budget template and it's formatted in a way that you've never thought about before, and you have to kind of go back and kind of reconfigure, you know, some of your details. You know, but the more that you can, you know, start thinking through this process early, the easier it is going to be when you start engaging the grant writing process. I'm not going to go into really any detail in terms of the budget, but I did want to point out that there's a lot of great arts organizations that have a ton of resources, you know, for creating budgets for projects of all different sizes and categories. I'm just listing some of them here. A simple Google search will, you know, bring up a ton of them. Fractured Atlas is a wonderful organization that oftentimes serves as a fiscal agent for artists and arts organizations that are doing a lot of these creative projects. Americans for the Arts, again, very there's a ton of information on their website in terms of support for artists, arts organizations, and some of these big creative projects, and they have a lot of resources there, but some of these other ones as well, like Creative Capital in the field. And then, you know, finally, there's a ton of funding sources out there for a lot of different kinds of projects. These are just you know, a few you know, of you know, the funding sources that are available to do these big collaborative projects. You know, we have Commonwealth Places, we have our Creative Cities program as well, that can fund you know, some you know, really interesting public facing collaborative projects. New Bedford Creative has Wicked Cool Places. It has the Art is Everywhere grant. You know, so there's some wonderful things locally. You know, the state and local creative cultural councils, they have the Festival and Artist grant. MassDOT has this wonderful program that rolled out during the pandemic called Shared Streets and Spaces. And you can use it for, you know, transportation related projects, parklets, you know, all kinds of really interesting projects that, you know, that happen on city streets and in public rights of ways. Patronicity is a crowdfunding platform that oftentimes supports a lot of these other programs. Bloomberg Philanthropies, they have all of Bloomberg's programs run through a mayor's office typically, so they have to go through, you know, be submitted through the executive, you know, the you know, whoever that is, you know, whether it's the city manager or mayor, but they have some really terrific programs, and they don't oftentimes, you know, they're not offered all the time, but when they are, they could be really interesting ways to get some funding into these projects. And then the National Endowment for the Arts has just an enormous amount of programs as well, Our Town grants, Artworks grants, and a number of other ones that can support some of these. So these are just sort of a taste of some of the funding sources that you can go after. So that's really it for me. I wanted to kind of focus more on the nuts and bolts. In retrospect, I think going into some of the specific projects might have been a little more interesting, but I hope there was some positive takeaway here.
Okay.
Oh, no, I just went over too.
Okay, no, we're good. Unshare your screen. And if people have questions, please add them into the chat or raise your hand if you know how to raise your hand. Because we certainly, with the amount of information that was just presented by our speakers, I can't imagine there are no questions. I think they all covered a wide range of stuff, and I'm very, very pleased with the scope of what they came up with.
Autumn has a question.
Okay, Autumn, you can unmute yourself and ask.
It took me a second, but yeah, so while I'm thinking of Jim's presentation, because it was in the forefront of my mind, where would you say the best place to start planning for an event would be?
I mean, if you're planning for an event, I suppose the best place to start is, who are you doing the event for? Like, what's your audience? Who are you trying to get there? You don't want to do an event that's, if you're trying to make it really accessible, to do it in some faraway place, right? So you want to be thinking about, who it's for, and then what's the purpose of the event. So I think, again, going back to those why questions are really, really important. Why are you doing it? Are you doing it just because you want to do this cool thing and it's an event you really want to put on, and you want a bunch of people to come and have fun with you, and or engage with a really interesting idea that you haven't explored before, like Mark's wonderful project there in the dark. So I think you start with the why questions, and that opens up a number of different avenues for you to kind of take, in terms of, okay, well, where am I going to do this? So what are the places that would accommodate this idea, and where would people, the kind of venues where people would feel comfortable, if you're or maybe you're trying to make something really creepy, and you want a creepy venue. So I think those why questions are where you want to start, and to start pinpointing the hows and the whys and the wheres.
Really, thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I think Jim's exactly right on that. I would say that for a visual artist like myself, the place to start and meander and organically develop is in the studio, right? I'm going to start a project. I'm going to see what I'm going to attach something. I'm going to carve it. I'm going to cast something. And you can do it that's fine in the studio, and that's a great way to work in the studio. But when you're in the public sphere, and I mean spending money, or in like literally in public, or working with others, it's absolutely working backwards. 100%. So I'm going to say the same thing Jim said in a different way, which is know what your limitations are, and know what you want to get out of it. And then you can kind of match up venues and people and numbers and all those things to ensure that you're doing it right. And I have to say one other note relative to working in the public sphere. And I've worked with bid directors and the Department of Transportation on artworks, on actually design works, creating pavilions and things like that in the public sphere in New York City. You do not want to be the responsible body working in the public sphere. You just don't. I'm just going to say, don't be that body. It's way too frustrating. There's way too much, bureaucratic tape. I've been in that world, and I still would call up Jim and say, what should I, or somebody like Jim, and say, like, what am I going to miss here? And I've done a lot of that. You do not want to be on the hook for working in public space. Always work with a sponsor who can handle the city and can handle the, any approvals and certificates. If you're doing something in private, in a museum or in a backyard, or that's a totally different thing. Do not be an artist working in public and be the responsible body. I really mean that. That's going to get you in trouble. You're going to screw something up. It's incredibly complex and very expensive. And just the time it takes to pull permits when you're Mark Parsons is totally different than when you're DATMA or, the College of Visual and Performing Arts. Don't take it on as a personal thing.
And I'll add that there are lots of organizations around the New Bedford Fall River area that are capable and would be happy to, if you come up with an idea that they think is worth doing, would be happy to partner with you.
I agree.
I'll also add that this is a great opportunity to start small so that you can see all the bases that need to be covered. 2, network with others who have been around those bases and see where you overlap with each other, as far as left brain, right brain stuff, to the checklists. You have new contacts now, like Jim and Mark. You and I talk regularly about these kinds of things, but always, the door's always open. but like learning more about what those checklists are, and then like kind of trying your hands at a project. And communications is so important. Like intent is important. What do you want? And identifying that, and then keeping those communications as clear as possible. And then a really big thing that helps me a lot in projects is thinking about reciprocity. If I pull this part of the project forward, other members are part of the project, what are they contributing, and who's holding on to what weight of what responsibility, and honoring each entity that does that, no matter how big or small that contribution is. That's especially important when working in the public sphere. You don't want to be in a situation where you work on a project and you ignore the ones that made that project come to life because they may not be as part of as grandiose of a role that was played. So being super mindful of looking at all the parties that are involved and being like showing gratitude for the efforts being put forth there. So when you're sending emails, when someone's behind the desk looking at emails and managing a lot of videos, right? Like that needs to be like honored and like mentioned. Like, I understand your plate is full. I understand you have this going on. I have this one question. Be direct, very to the point. Do all the homework you can to have all the information every time you communicate with a party. And then another thing that helps is deadlines. Set deadlines. Like Jim was saying, like if there's a meeting that's about permits that happens only every 2 months, like do the work to figure out what questions need to be asked, what forms need to be turned in, who need to be in contact with, how can you make their life easier, you know? And that kind of speeds a lot of things up. It's more laborious thinking that way, but I find it helps significantly as far as making a project run more efficiently, as opposed to just focusing on the scope of what you want to do or what role you have to play in.
That's great. Nicole has a question. Nicole, you want to do that on screen? Just unmute yourself.
Sure. Yeah, this question is for any of the speakers, each of them, if they want to answer it. But what kinds of organizational tools do you have used in the past, and what do you use now, and how has that changed over time?
When you say tools, do you mean software? Do you mean pattern? Like what? Like anything in specific?
It could be anything from digital tools to sort of techniques that you use. It's a pretty broad organizational tools. Yeah.
I love Dropbox, and I love folders management in Dropbox.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still very like old school as far as like organization, with all my Post-it notes right here.
Okay, yeah, good old Post-it notes.
I have different to-do lists that I manage on my like phone, and then my email. I've got phone calls, social media. I organize and manage a lot of stuff via social media things. Like I'll reach out to different groups doing different things, inquire what they're looking for, how things are going, share that information with another group. And it's kind of like playing volleyball with different organizations, trying to get different agendas or goals accomplished, and figuring out if there's any cracks that need to be filled, and can I help with any of that, and then let them know what I'm doing. And then that helps a lot. But that's more like in the community engagement sense. Social, but like making things available visually and then in an email. So like if I'm sending an email to Jim and I'm like, Jim, there's this thing coming up, I have a question, I might also attach like an image of what I'm talking about, because then that helps the information come across more thoroughly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I also love those are great suggestions, and I mean I rely on spreadsheets a lot. And you know, I think they're just such a clear, easy way to organize things, and they're so simple that they become incredibly dynamic in a way, because you can really think through projects in complex ways with them. But also, I like easily accessible and intuitive design programs like SketchUp. I find that's a good one for project concepts, because you can lay out public spaces, you can you can think about interior spaces, you can pull pre-made designs from the 3D warehouse and plug them in. to make concepts go easier. So I find that to be really, really helpful as well.
Okay.
I would,
And
I would-
Mark.
Let me add a couple things too, but just let me also mention that the poll is now running. So before any of you leave, please take the poll. I think there are lots of really good tools, and they start with pencil and paper, but they run right up to very complex design programs. I think the most important thing is to find something that works the way you think.
Mhm.
If you find something that works the way you think, it will help you organize. If you find something that that somebody tells you is great and you don't find it works along the lines of how you organize yourself and your thoughts, it's going to be competing with your ability to get anything done. So if something seems just like this is not helping, then abandon it and find something that is helping.
That's great advice.
agree. Though I would like to add on the communication side that this tool right here with texting is good for meet me at 3 o'clock, but I never do content with texts. So meet me at 3 o'clock is about as good, as deep as I get on texting, because I want a written, archived, written kind of history of anything. It's not so much to catch other people, it's to make sure that I know what I committed to, or what's that thing I need to look up or whatever. So I try and keep all content in a place where I can easily go back and search it on the communication side. And then, if I came across my presentation as spastic or whatever, I love to draw. I'm a major hand drawing person, but everything happens through Excel. I don't get into any, I can be all spazzy on a piece of paper, but no project happens without a spreadsheet. It is absolutely essential to do it that way. And you got to work on it, several days in a row, and you go back and you find more detail and you fill it out. And you've got your version of the spreadsheet, and where you've got all this detail, telephone numbers and how much it costs and all that stuff. And then you open the next tab, you drop it all in there, you cut out all the extraneous, and you have a budget. Now you have a budget for your grant, and it's 10 lines long instead of 100 lines long. The Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheets that's where it's at, man. You got to think like super structured.
I mean, is anyone using anything as fancy as Microsoft Project or project management level tools?
It's interesting. At work, we got the Microsoft 365 system, and I've actually fallen in love with it. It has so much functionality. Like every time I fall into it, in an unexpected way, I find another tool that we can use. So we've been, as an agency, we've been always like, oh well, we need to get this thing from this vendor and this thing from that vendor and try to cobble them together. But I gotta say, Microsoft 365 got a lot of functionality. It can pretty much do everything. So I've been pretty happy with it. We haven't, I feel like we've only scratched the surface in terms of its capability as a team tool, and as a collaborative tool. There's a lot of functionality there as well. So yeah, I like it.
Okay, thanks.
Miro is another one that I've liked a lot too.
Okay.
Because you can put a lot of ideas on there. And fool around with.
Surprised to hear you say that, Jim.
With them, but then you can collaborate with it. You can bring other people into the same document.
Miro is good for teaching remotely and stuff, but that would be too spastic for me. And I've tried project management softwares, Nicole, and I think they're great, but they require an investment of time before you get the return back. And Nicole, you're starting to know me, get to know me a little bit more. I am moving too fast in the things that I'm doing to want to invest the time in the management software. Probably
Yeah.
a smart thing for me to do. So I'm not, that's not advice. That's not advice. I just haven't really fully adopted it yet.
Yeah, I mean, I've used like things like Asana before,
Mm.
with previous employers, and those kinds of things are great because they can scale a lot and they're all web-based. And so, okay, yeah, thanks. These are great answers, everyone. Thank you.
I would love to know, Kareem, Matthew, Rachel, Vanya, Brooke, what do you all, Autumn? I think I got a sense, but from you, Autumn, but what are you all, why are you here? What is your métier? What's your discipline? What are you interested in? I would love to hear. Or type it into the chat if you don't feel like talking, or if you're eating dinner.
Sorry, it's dark in my house. I'm a musician, graphic design. I do photography. I'm a writer, so kind of multidisciplinary, I guess. So yeah.
Are you in Fall River, New Bedford, or?
I'm from New Bedford. I live in Fall River now, though.
Right on. Cool.
And my name is Vanya. I'm an artist. I have a studio at the Narrow Center for the Arts. I try to do a lot of community involved events. Right now, I'm working on a STARS residency with the St. Michael's School, where I was actually previously an arts teacher for about 10 years, and quit right after COVID when my art lessons went to Zoom lessons, and I just didn't feel accomplished. But yeah, my focus has always been trying to bring arts to the community. And there's always a gap sometimes in that bridge, and that's why I'm here. I mean, sometimes you learn through other people's experiences, and that's what I'm hoping to gain. So
Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. I can relate with Matthew. I have various passions in multiple disciplines. I am a signed model and actor. I've been working heavily with the youth and with people dealing with mental illness. So I'm very much involved in the community, also do a lot of outreaches with the homeless. I'm also a dance artist. So I'm frequently performing at various events and shows. So I just wanted to, come here and just listen and, gain some new perspective, gain some knowledge. I would love to in the future, put on events for the youth, incorporate, creativity, dance as well, dance in the youth. I studied at Nyack College. I studied music education, so I have my degree in that as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And I just started my own business called Positive Pathways, and I'm launching my own podcast show. I've also had a radio show in the past, so I just want to spread positivity through my art, through my work, and yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's great.
Rachel typed a question in. Rachel, do you want to come on screen? And
it wasn't a question. I was just letting
Oh.
folks know why I'm here, what I'm interested in working on. I'm recovering from surgery, so I'm reclining, not on camera. But thanks. This has been really helpful.
Good.
I'm Brooke Doherty. I do drawing, painting, printmaking, photography. I do a lot of different stuff. And unlike most people here, I think I have tended to focus more on what I can do by myself in my studio. I've happened into a couple of public projects over the years that were exciting, but after like several years now of just focusing on work by myself and also trying to work with 3 children, I realized that I have a new interest in my work being more relevant. Like I have a whole studio full of hundreds of things I've made that I've never shown or shared with people, and perhaps thinking about it from the other end, not just what do I feel like doing today, but like actually what might there be a need for? How might I make something that connects with others more? It's something I'm trying to focus on more as I like sort of re-enter focusing on my career after time spent with 3 children who are being super loud outside lots of this evening. So
Totally appreciate that. Can I do a quick anecdote in response to that, Brooke? So I was in New York after grad school, and I was in my studio, and I was making, and showing, blah, 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 and a little bit, but didn't really break out or anything like that. And I'm a disabled person. I have MS, and it has affected me in a whole bunch of different ways. And my partner at the time was like, why don't you do this, apply for this grant that has to do with disability. I applied for it. I was like, no, I don't want to be known as disabled. Nobody can tell I'm disabled. Nobody knows I'm blind in my right eye. Nobody, like, I don't want to do that because I don't want to do that. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me to go and work with kids. I designed a project. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It got me out of studio, and I worked with people in public. I was working with kids that were in hospitals at the time. And it set the rest of it. It was the motivational thing for the rest of my life. That was. So I totally relate to what you're doing. What you just represented, and right there, like go. I'm really glad to hear you're ready to do something to get out of studio. I think that's really powerful.
Here.
I wanted to add just a little bit to that, Brooke. So after finishing grad school, I was always asking the question, well, like, I knew I wanted to teach, and so I started teaching, but I always felt like, what can I give the students that beyond the studio practice, because they're going to have bills that are going to come. We all have bills that need to be paid. So with me, I was like, really like, I needed to figure out how could I find a way to get this information to them. Well, I'd have to get out of my studio, go figure out like the basics, business. And then I went down this big rabbit hole and like started a business, I'm like going nuts, learning about taxes right now, learning about but it's what mattered to me, because I want to bring that information back into the classroom, because I love teaching the students like drawing and animation and painting, but I also want to give them a sense of hope of like, you could make some revenue with this and not just be like I had amazing faculty that I, in my education, but none of them ever had that talk of, here's how you're going to pay bills with this stuff outside of go to a gallery. So like whatever it matters to you, like just grabs at you, like that's going to be the thing that'll, hi there. That's like whatever like grabs your heart, that's going to be the thing that I would follow that, and that pulls you out of that studio space if that's what you want.
Yeah, I love these comments. When I was in high school, I hated public school, and then I almost dropped out, and I was on kind of the wrong path, let's say, and then I found a school that completely broke open my social network, and all of a sudden I was hanging out with people from all over the state, and it completely changed my life. I mean, my life completely changed. And it was funny because my wife had a similar experience. She grew up in a small town in Central Mass, and then she always loved being an artist. She wanted to be an artist. Then she took part in Art All-State, this big collaborative thing where people come together from all over the state and they do these great projects. Over the course of several days, it changed her life. It completely changed her life. It opened up all kinds of relationships and networks and everything else, and it set her on an entirely different path than where she was going. So I love that getting out and experiencing and mixing it up. So I'd love to see some of your work that's squirreled away in your studio.
Yeah, and I want to add to that a whole part of the mission and the conception of practice best practice is to combat the whole concept of the starving artist, and help people understand that as an artist, you are also a business. And you need to consider that. And if you don't know about our other workshops, please check out our other workshops. They're all available online, and there will be more. We have 3 more scheduled for sure this season. And we are hoping to add more to that package, and we will keep going as long as the funding keeps coming back at us. So we're getting down to the end. Do we have any final questions? All right, well, I'm going to wrap it up then, because we've got 3 minutes left on the clock. I want to thank our panelists for doing a wonderful job covering so much and in such a set of bite-sized ways. I think it's important that all of that was very digestible. And I think that this is going to be viewed a lot on our website. And I think I'd like to thank Ashley and the FRAC for funding this one, and all of you for attending. And please spread the word. We're trying to make an impact for creatives, and by creatives we don't mean just visual artists. We mean musicians. We mean anybody who does anything creative and wants to try and do something that is out there for the world, and also to make some money at it. So I really want to thank all of you for joining us, and say see you on the next one, which is February 15th.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good evening.